paying the ultimate price? We ask whether the death penalty still has a place in modern society. Also on today's program, the new battleground between East and West as tempers flare in the Baltic Sea. We ask why Estonia is bolstering its defense forces. And in picture this, Chernobyl may have been abandoned by people for almost 30 years, but its wildlife is surviving and thriving in the nuclear exclusion zone. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Last year, more people were executed by governments than in any other year since 1989. Amnesty International says at least 1,634 people were put to death, a 54% increase on the year before. But on the other hand, in that same year, 4 countries abolished the death penalty. And for the first time in history, the majority of the world's countries did not use capital punishment. But why are those states that have it using it more than ever? And in the 21st century, is it ever justifiable to take a life for a life? In a moment, I'll be talking to Anthony Graves, a man who spent 18 years in prison, 12 of them on death row, before being exonerated. Today's newsmaker is the death penalty.
State-sanctioned killings, the ultimate punishment handed down for heinous crimes. Despite growing global condemnation and more countries choosing to abolish, last year saw the highest number of executions worldwide in more than 25 years. According to Amnesty International, at least 1,634 people were executed in 25 countries in 2015. Most were carried out in 5 countries: China, Iran, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia and the US. Amnesty says the figures in China are unclear, but it believes thousands were executed there.
This organization you mentioned often has some biased reviews on China, and we don't have comment on that.
Iran alone accounted for 82% of executions in the Middle East, with at least 977. Pakistan lifted a 6-year moratorium on execution of civilians in December 2014, following a Taliban attack on a school in Peshawar. Last year, it executed 326 people. 158 were executed in Saudi Arabia in 2015, a 76% increase on the previous year, while 28 people were put to death in the US. But on the other hand, 4 more countries banned the death penalty in 2015, and Mongolia will abolish it later this year. The United States, a leading world power, a beacon of democracy, and a champion of human rights. It was also the 5th highest executor in 2015. While the numbers are falling, 7 fewer were executed than in 2014, and it was the lowest number since 1991. But 31 states still have the death penalty, and pressure to end it is mounting. The EU has an export ban on the drugs used in lethal injections, and stocks are running low.
What happened in Oklahoma is deeply troubling.
In September 2014, convicted murderer and rapist Clayton Lockett was given a concoction of drugs in what should have been a fast-working lethal injection. But he lived for 43 minutes in apparent pain.
In the application of the death penalty in this country, we have seen significant problems. Racial bias, an uneven application. Situations in which there were individuals on death row who later on were discovered to have been innocent because of exculpatory evidence.
For the majority of Americans, the death penalty is a vital part of the justice system. According to Pew Research, 56% agree with it for those convicted of murder. But overall support is declining. It's as low as it's been in 40 years. With questions about the fairness of trials and whether capital punishment does work as a deterrent, many within the US and around the world say it's time for it to be abolished completely. Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to discuss the death penalty from Houston, Texas, is Anthony Graves, a man who spent 12 years on death row before being exonerated. And in Philadelphia, we have the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, John Lott, who believes capital punishment is the most efficient way of stopping crime. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. John Lott, is your argument for the death penalty utilitarian or moral?
It's purely utilitarian. It's a question of deterrence. Just as you can deter criminals with higher arrest rates or higher conviction rates, the fact that in certain crimes the death penalty is available clearly deters the number of murders that are there. I mean, you see this in many different ways. I mean, one simple example is how when you have plea bargains that occur, that simply the threat of the death penalty causes people to agree to first-degree murder charges, so you don't have to go through and have the criminal trial that's there.
Anthony Graves, it's a deterrent. You spent 12 years on death row, you were exonerated, 18 years in total in prison. When you hear that, how do you respond?
Well, I say that the death penalty hasn't shown to be a deterrent in any state that practices it. For example, in the South. In the South, you have like 80% of the people that get executed come from the South. You have the highest crime rate in the South. But go to the Northeast, less than 1% of the people getting executed is in the Northeast, and you have less crime in the Northeast. So this whole notion about it being a deterrent, I don't understand where that comes from.
John, you buy any of that?
See, here's the problem. The places that adopt the death penalty are the ones that have the highest death rate or murder rate to begin with. And what you see is that after they adopt the death penalty, there's a drop in murder rates in those places relative to what they were before, and you see drops in those places relative to the states that didn't choose to change their rules with regard to the death penalty. There's clear evidence that those states that have the most executions have the biggest relative drops in murder rates relative to other places. They still may be higher than some other places, but they're much lower than they were in the past.
John, I want to ask you about whether the system is very flawed. I mean, you have Anthony Graves, who's a victim of the system, right? Is it just as simple as telling him, hey, we got it wrong, we're sorry we screwed up your entire life, bad things happened, there was a bad prosecutor, bad luck, glitch in the system. Is that acceptable, John?
Look, I mean, nobody wants mistakes to occur. The question is, at what rate do the mistakes occur? And when you look at, so there's 130 people they claim that have been exonerated. In fact, most of those cases actually involve legal changes, changes in the definition by the courts in terms of what's classified as murders. But when you look at actual exonerations, you're talking about something that's way less than 1% of the cases. Should it be even less than 1%? Sure. I mean, it'd be great to try to reduce that as much as possible. But, you know, you look at violent crimes in general that have been changed as a result of DNA evidence, and there you're talking about tenths or hundreds of 1%. And so the question is, how many lives do you save versus how many times do you have mistakes? It'd be great if there were zero mistakes. Nobody wants to have any of these mistakes that occur. And in the individual's case that we're talking to, you have it so that he's been given millions of dollars in terms of trying to compensate him. Is that going to compensate him? No. But at least it tries to help him out a little bit to make up for the lost years that he had there. But so the question is, can we save lives? Is this an effective way to try to do that? And how do we balance that off in terms of having mistakes that are way less than 1% or tenths or hundreds of a percent, depending upon the crime you're looking at.
Anthony, in the bigger picture, then the argument is you're a statistical minority and you've been given millions of dollars in order to try to make up for it.
That's not even an argument. That's not even an argument. That's an excuse to continue to practice an inhumane practice because of the fact that 156 men have been exonerated from the death penalty across this nation. That means that we know for a fact that had we executed those men, we would have not only executed 156 innocent men. So the question to me is this: if we're executing mostly guilty men, 99% guilty men, and we're executing a few innocent men, is that enough to keep the death penalty? Because that's what is actually happening. So are we saying that it is okay to execute one innocent person as long as we're executing 100 guilty people? Because that's the question. Whether you believe in the death penalty or whether you do not believe in the death penalty is not even a question when it comes to this practice. The question is, does it work? And I can tell you, sitting in my seat, that it does not work. And I can also tell you from the, basically, for the other 155 men that walked out of there, that you cannot tell their parents that it's okay that we gave them $1 million and they should be okay now. Because $1 million has not erased the memories of my mind when I witnessed over 350 executions, when I witnessed men going out of their minds, when I witnessed men slitting their throats, when I witnessed men dropping their pills because of the conditions, when I witnessed men literally just going insane at the age of 19, 25, 60. You can't tell me that it's okay for that man to experience that type of torture, give him $1 million and he's okay.
Okay,
it does
John,
not work that way.
Let me bring John in. John, if the system was more efficient, the man you're debating would be dead already, wouldn't he?
Well, I mean, one thing to point out is there's been no cases that I think anybody agrees on that somebody's been executed when they shouldn't have been. There have been cases where people have been convicted and in the process of review have been released for various reasons, not just exoneration. It's been, in many cases, you've had the courts change what they define as the crime or whether you can be guilty. And so, and look, and it's more than millions of dollars. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars given to these individuals. But the question is, what do you say to the people whose lives would be lost because you weren't able to deter these criminals? You know,
that's an interesting question. Yeah, it's an interesting question.
Even though they weren't executed, we're having to spend some time in jail.
Okay,
but
let me ask Anthony.
Is, what do you say to the people
Let me take that and develop it a little bit, John.
I
want to ask Anthony.
What do you say to my mother?
Sure. Anthony, if
you'll
allow me.
What do you say to my mother who lost her son to a system? Okay.
And that's very powerful. And apologies for interrupting you. Anthony, let me ask you, let me take this a bit further. Do you believe the man who did kill those 6 people that you were initially convicted of killing on that night in 1992, Robert Earl Carter, the man who murdered those 6, including 4 kids aged 4 to 9. Then he lied about your involvement for 8 years before recanting just before he was executed. He was a child killer. He was a liar. He was a bad man. And he was executed. Was his execution just, Anthony?
Well, let me kind of back up and kind of. He recanted the same night. Okay, it was 10 years before it was discovered that he had already been telling them that I was innocent. They withheld that. They lied. They went after his wife and told him basically, you continue to lie or we're going to go after you. We're going to charge your wife with capital murder. So that is the facts of that case. But if this man, and I say if because I don't know, but if this man indeed killed these 6 people, then to me, there had to have been some mental issues. There have to have been some mitigating circumstances that had allowed a man to just go and kill 6 innocent people. I don't think someone just wakes up and decides to go kill 6 innocent people.
Okay, if
there
he
have
did
to be
it,
some mitigating
Anthony,
factors there.
Okay, I mean, it seems as if he did it. If he did do it, should he be sitting in a jail funded by the taxpayer until he dies, rather than being executed as he was?
Well, let me break this also down to you. Okay, when you talk about the death penalty versus a life without parole, let me just say this. You're talking about 2 death sentences. So the choice is this. Do you want to poison this man's body with fluid and kill him, or do you want him to die of natural causes because you got 2 death sentences on the table? There's no such thing as a life without parole behind bars. You're there till you die unless you put poison in his vein first. Do we as a society want to treat him inhumanely? Or do we want to treat him humanely until he dies? Because he's there forever, until he takes his last breath. That's the question. So whether we pump poison in his veins or whether we just let him die of natural causes, it is the death penalty. And so I would say, yes, he deserved the death penalty, but he should die of natural causes.
Okay.
Because who are we to decide to play God.
Okay, okay, point well made. John, I want to ask you, the Pew Research Center survey finds 56% of Americans favor the death penalty for people convicted of murder, while 38% are opposed to it. But since the 1960s, that first figure seems to be going down, the second going up. There seems to be a slow evolution of American views. At some point in a US democracy, it seems as if, given the trend, most people will be against the death penalty. Does that naturally suggest to you that at some point there has to be a federal ban because the people want it?
Look, there are lots of different polls that are out there. The Pew poll at 56% is by far the lowest that I know of on this. A lot of the polls are in the mid to high 60 range. You actually have some that are 70%. And again, depending upon the poll that you look at, it determines whether or not it's been fairly constant or whether it's been falling. The Pew, again, is relatively unusual in terms of showing a decline there. But even if somehow there was a temporary decline, that doesn't mean that you don't see increases again in the future. I mean, surely anybody who's looked at polls of politicians or whatever know these things go up and down over time. And if it does go down, then they can go and change it. But as long as most of the polls are showing 67, 68, 69% of the American people strongly support being able to go and have this as an option, it's not used that often. You just can't murder somebody. You have to murder them, and there has to be what's called special circumstances,
right, which
means did they go and do it in a particularly heinous way? Did they torture the people before they went and killed them? And in those cases where you have those special circumstances, a lot of people believe that this type of deterrence, if it can save some lives, and there's a lot of statistical evidence, the vast majority of studies done by economists and criminologists show that for each execution, you save about 8 lives.
John, we don't have much time. I want one final question for you. Sorry to interrupt you. I want one final question for you and then a final word from Anthony. But I'm going to start with you, John. Just broadening this out a little bit. In terms of modern, wealthy, industrialized nations, the U.S. is a bit of an outlier on this issue. The U.S. is quoted in the same sentence as China, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Pakistan whenever we're looking at the numbers of people executed every year. Are you comfortable with being in the same basket as these countries when it comes to the death penalty? As an American, are you comfortable with that?
Look, I mean, they execute for completely different reasons. For China, it has a lot to do with political stuff. There's no political executions that occur in the United States. You have to go and murder multiple people. They have to be special circumstances that are there. We have terrorism that occurs. I mean, you mentioned 28 people were executed in the United States, and all those other countries, you were talking about, thousands in China, hundreds in other countries that are there. The issue is, why do we do it in the United States? We do it, at least a lot of people do it, in order to try to save other lives.
Okay.
And so that seems to me a completely different reason for doing it.
Okay, Anthony Graves, the U.S. is different from other countries because you do it to try to save other lives. There are no political executions. Final word from you, please, sir, because we are running out of time.
Well, I just go back to the fact that whether you believe in the death penalty or not, I think that's a personal choice. It definitely is, but I don't think our emotions should govern our society. It should come from a rational state of mind. And I believe that when we're shown that 156 men have been exonerated from this inhumane punishment, that means that common sense says that someone didn't make it, and we've executed someone innocent. Now, are we comfortable with that? Because we are executing mostly guilty people. But if we execute a few along the way that are innocent, are we comfortable with that? It doesn't matter about what you believe in. Are you comfortable with executing innocent people?
Okay, gentlemen, unfortunately, time is our enemy. It has been an absorbing discussion. Sorry, John. I've got to wrap because I've got to move on to other stuff. But John Lott and Anthony Graves, thank you very much for joining us.